Boston is a town and small port in Lincolnshire, on the east coast of England. It is the largest town of the wider Borough of Boston local government district. The borough had a total population of 64,637 at the 2011 census, whilst the town itself had a population of 35,124 at the 2001 census. It is due north of Greenwich on the Prime Meridian. Boston's most notable landmark is St. Botolph's Church, said to be the largest parish church in England, with one of the taller towers in England visible for miles around from the flat lands of Lincolnshire. Residents of Boston are known as Bostonians. Emigrants from Boston named several other settlements after the town, most notably Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. The name Boston is said to be a contraction of St. Botolph's Town, Stone, or Ton. The town's direct link to the St. is probably apocryphal, but the name may have arisen from confusion as to the site of his monastery or owing to his patronage of the parish church. Early history. The town was once held to have been a Roman settlement, but there is no evidence that this is the case. Similarly, it is often linked to the monastery established by the Saxon monk Botolph at Icano on the Witham in AD 654 and destroyed by the Vikings in 870, but this is now doubted by modern historians. The early medieval geography of the fens was much more fluid than it is today, and at that time the Witham did not flow near the site of Boston. Botolph's establishment is most likely to have been in Suffolk. However, he was a popular missionary and saint, to whom many churches between Yorkshire and Sussex are dedicated. The 1086 Domesday Book does not mention Boston by name, but nearby settlements of the tenant-in-chief Count Alan Rufus of Brittany are covered. Its present territory was probably then part of the grant of Skirbic, part of the very wealthy manor of Drayton, which before 1066 had been owned by Ralph the Staller Edward the Confessor's Earl of East Anglia. Skirbic had two churches, and one is likely to have been that dedicated to St. Botolph, in what was consequently Botolph's Town. Skirbic is now considered part of Boston, but the name remains, as a church parish and an electoral ward. The order of importance was the other way round, when the Boston quarter of Skirbic developed at the head of the Haven, which lies under the present marketplace. At that stage, the Haven was the tidal part of the stream, now represented by the stone bridge drain, which carried the water from the east and west fens. The line of the road through Wide Bargate to A52 and A16 is likely to have developed on its marine silt levees. It led, as it does now, to the relatively high ground at Sibsey, and thence to Lindsay. The reason for the original development of the town, away from the centre of Skirbic, was that Boston lay on the point where navigable tidal water was alongside the land route, which used the Devensian terminal moraine ridge at Sibsey, between the upland of East Lindsay and the three routes to the south of Boston. The coastal route, on the marine silts, crossed the mouth of Bickerhaven towards Spalding. The Sleaford route, into Kesteven, past Fair-Swine's Head, thence following the old course of the River Slee, on its marine silt levee. The Salters Way route into Kesteven left Holland from Donington. This route was much more thoroughly developed, in the later medieval period, by Bridgend Priory. The River Witham seems to have joined the Haven after the flood of September 1014, having abandoned the port of Drayton, on what subsequently became known as Bickerhaven. The predecessor of Ralph the Staller owned most of both Skirbic and Drayton, so it was a relatively simple task to transfer his business from Drayton. But the Domesday Book of 1086 still records his source of income in Boston under the heading of Drayton. Sir Boston's name is famously not mentioned. The town bridge still maintains the pre-flood route along the old Haven bank. Growth after the Norman conquest, Ralph the Staller's property was taken over by Count Alan. It subsequently came to be attached to the earldom of Richmond, North Yorkshire, and known as the Richmond Fee. It lay on the left bank of the Haven. During the 11th and 12th centuries, Boston grew into a notable town and port. In 1204, King John vested sole control over the town in his bailiff. That year or the next, he levied a 15th tax of 6.67% on the movable goods of merchants in the ports of England. The merchants of Boston paid £780, the highest in the kingdom after London's £836. Thus, by the opening of the 13th century, it was already significant in trade with the continent of Europe and ranked as a port of the Hanseatic League. Edward III named it a staple port for the wool trade in 1369. Apart from wool, Boston also exported salt, produced locally on the Holland coast, grain, produced upriver, and lead, produced in Derbyshire and brought via Lincoln upriver. A quarrel between the local and foreign merchants led to the withdrawal of the Hansards around 1470. Around the same time, the decline of the local guilds and shift towards domestic weaving of English wool led to a near-complete collapse of the town's foreign trade. The silting of the Haven only furthered the town's decline. At the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII during the English Reformation, Boston's Dominican, Franciscan, Carmelite, and Augustinian friaries, erected during the boom years of the 13th and 14th centuries, were all expropriated. The refectory of the Dominican friary was eventually converted into a theatre in 1965 and now houses the Blackfriars Arts Centre. Henry VIII granted the town its charter in 1545, and Boston had 2 members of Parliament from 1552. 17th and 18th centuries. The staple trade made Boston a center of intellectual influence from the continent, including the teachings of John Calvin that became known as Calvinism. This, in turn, revolutionized the Christian beliefs and practices of many Bostonians and residents of the neighboring shires of England. In 1607, a group of pilgrims from Nottinghamshire led by William Brewster and William Bradford attempted to escape pressure to conform with the teaching of the English Church by going to the Netherlands from Boston. At the time, unsanctioned emigration was illegal, and they were brought before the court in the Guildhall. Most of the pilgrims were released fairly soon, and the following year set sail for the Netherlands, settling in Leiden. In 1620, several of these were among the group who moved to New England in the Mayflower. Boston remained a hotbed of religious dissent. In 1612, John Cotton became the vicar of St. Botolph's and, although viewed askance by the Church of England for his nonconformist preaching, became responsible for a large increase in church attendance. He encouraged those who disliked the lack of religious freedom in England to join the Massachusetts Bay Company, and later helped to found the city of Boston, Massachusetts, which he was instrumental in naming. Unable to tolerate the religious situation any longer, he eventually emigrated himself in 1633. At the same time, work on draining the fens to the west of Boston was begun, a scheme which displeased many whose livelihoods were at risk. This and the religious friction put Boston into the parliamentarian camp in the Civil War, which in England began in 1642. The chief backer of the drainage locally, Lord Lindsay, was shot in the first battle, and the fens returned to their accustomed dampness until after 1750. The later 18th century saw a revival when the fens began to be effectively drained. The Act of Parliament permitting the embanking and straightening of the Fenland Whitlam was dated 1762. A sluice, called for in the Act, was designed to help scour out the Haven. The land proved to be fertile, and Boston began exporting cereals to London. In 1774 the first financial bank was opened, and in 1776 an Act of Parliament allowed watchmen to begin patrolling the streets at night. Modern history. In the 19th century, the names of Howden, a firm located near the Grand Sluice, and Tuxford, near the moored Foster Sluice, were respected among engineers for the steam road locomotives, thrashing engines and the like. Howden developed his business from making steam engines for riverboats, while Tuxford began as a miller and millwright. His mill was once prominent near Skirbick Church, just to the east of the moored Foster drain. The railway reached the town in 1848, and it was briefly on the main line from London to the north. The area between the Black Sluice and the railway station was mainly railway yard and the railway company's main depot. The latter facility moved to Doncaster when the modern main line was opened. Boston remained something of a local railway hub well into the 20th century, moving the produce of the district and the trade of the dock, plus the excursion trade to Skegness and similar places. But it was much quieter by the time of the beaching cuts of the 1960s. Boston once again became a significant port in trade and fishing in 1884, when the new dock with its associated wharves on the haven were constructed. It continued as a working port, exporting grain, fertilizer, and importing timber, although much of the fishing trade was moved out in the interwar period. During the First World War, many of the town's trawlermen, together with those from Grimsby, were taken prisoner after the ships were sunk by German raiders in the North Sea. The families did not know what had happened to them until late September 1914. The men were taken to Senlaga Camp, then on to Rulabone Pow Camp, where most remained till repatriated in 1918. There is a full report of the homecoming in the Lincolnshire Standard newspaper, January 1918. Meanwhile, the port was used by hospital ships, and some 4,000 sick or wounded troops passed through Boston. The first cinema opened in 1910, and the town was used by filmmakers during the Second World War to represent the Netherlands when the real thing was not available for filming. In 1913, a new town bridge was constructed. Central Park was purchased in 1919, and is now one of the focal points of the town. Electricity came to Boston during the early part of the century, and electrical street lighting was provided from 1924. In the Second World War, the borough lost 17 civilian dead through enemy air raids. A memorial in Boston Cemetery commemorates them. The Haven Bridge, which now carries the two trunk roads over the river, was opened in 1966, and the new road built in the early 1970s rather separated Skirbick from Boston, but the town largely avoided the development boom of the 1960s. A shopping center, named the Pescud Center, opened in 2004, bringing many new shops into the town. Further development was planned as of 2012. There had been widespread disillusionment with what was perceived as the somewhat apathetic and incompetent running of the local council. In the local elections of 2007, this contributed to the overwhelming victory of a small bypass pressure group over the traditional political parties. Describing the victory, the new council leader Richard Austin said, "We knew that the mood of the people of Boston was very black, and they really do want something to happen to Boston that isn't happening at the moment. It's only a reflection of this black mood of the people of Boston." Boston United Football Club was relegated after losing its final match of the 2006 seventh season against Wrexham, and following some financial irregularities during Steve Evans's time as manager of the club. A report, cited in The Sun in 2008, highlighted that Boston has the highest number of immigrants per capita of any town in Britain. Transport. Railway. The railways came to Boston in 1848 following the building of the East Lincolnshire Railway from Grimsby to Boston and the simultaneous building of the Lincolnshire Loop Line by the Great Northern Railway, which ran between Peterborough and York via Boston, Lincoln and Doncaster. This line was built before the East Coast Main Line and for a short while put Boston on the map as the GNR's main locomotive works before it was relocated to Doncaster in 1852. Boston Railway Station is served by East Midland trains on the Poacher Line from Grantham to Skegness. It was the southern terminus of the East Lincolnshire Line to Louth and Grimsby until closure in 1970. Politics. Boston residents voted strongly in favor of leaving the European Union on 23 June 2016. Boston Bypass. In May 2007, a single-issue political party, the Independent Bypass Group, campaigning for a bypass to be built around Boston, Lincolnshire, took control of Boston Borough Council, removing the Labour Party majority governance. Boston received its charter in 1545. It is the main settlement in the Boston local government district of Lincolnshire, which includes the unparished town of Boston and 18 other civil parishes. Electoral wards. In 2015, the Boston Borough Council consisted of 30 members. Coastal Ward elects 2 councillors. Fenside Ward elects 2 councillors. Fishtoft Ward elects 3 councillors. 5 Villages Ward elects 2 councillors. Curtin and Amp Frampton Ward elects 3 councillors. Old Leek and Amp Wrangle elects 2 councillors. Skirbick Ward elects 3 councillors. Stannerland Ward elects 2 councillors. Station Ward elects 1 councillor. St Thomas Ward elects 1 councillor. Swineshead and Amp Holland Ward elects 2 councillors. Trinity Ward elects 2 councillors. West Ward elects 1 councillor. Whittam Ward elects 2 councillors. Wyberton Ward elects 2 councillors. In the local elections of 2007, many local councillors from the major parties were displaced by independent candidates whose main issue as a group is the construction of a road bypass, which they believe is being deliberately denied by the Lincoln-centric members of the Lincolnshire County Council. However, in 2011, the Conservative Party took control with a majority, effectively removing the previous administration. Nationally, Boston is in the East Midlands European Parliament constituency, which elects 6 members. At the national level, the town is part of the Boston and Skegness parliamentary constituency, currently represented by Conservative Matt Warman. The town was previously represented in Parliament for 35 years by Conservative Sir Richard Boddy. Demography. Population. According to the 2001 census, there were 35,124 people residing in Boston town, of whom 48.2% were male and 51.8% were female. Children under 5 accounted for approximately 5% of the population. 23% of the resident population in Boston were of retirement age. In the 2011 census, the Borough of Boston had a population of 64,600, with 15% of the population having been born outside of the UK and 11% having been born in EU accession countries such as Poland and Lithuania. Religion. 80% of the population are Christians. The next highest religious minority were Hindus, making up 0.7%. Arts and culture. Boston has historically had strong cultural connections to the Netherlands, and Dutch influence can be found in its architecture. Landmarks. Some of the most interesting things to be seen in Boston lie not in the usual list of tourist features, but in the area of civil engineering. However, there are remarkable sites of the more usual sort. The parish church of St. Botolph is known locally as the Stump Stump and is renowned for its lantern interior and 52 misericords. The Grand Sluice is disguised by railway and road bridges, but it is there, keeping the tide out of the fens and twice a day, allowing the water from the upland to scour the haven. Not far away, in the opposite direction, was the boyhood home of John Fox, the author of Fox's Book of Martyrs. The town bridge maintains the line of the road to Lincolnshire from its western end, looking at the river side of the Exchange building to the right. It is possible to see how the two ends of the building, founded on the natural levees of the haven, have stood firm while the middle has sunk into the infill of the former river. From 1552, the Bostonians used to have their jail near the Stump. This is likely to be where the Scrooby Pilgrims were imprisoned in 1607. The lawyers' quarter is still in use, just to the north of the church. A statue of the founder of the Illustrated London News, Herbert Ingram, is now located in front of the Stump. The statue was designed by Alexander Munro and was unveiled in October 1862. The allegorical figure, at the base of the monument, is a reference to Ingram's efforts to bring the first piped water to the town. He was also instrumental in bringing the railways to Boston. Born in nearby Paddock Grove, son of a butcher, he was also MP for Boston, from 1856 until his death in 1860, in a shipping accident on Lake Michigan. The market, held on Saturdays and Wednesdays, in the marketplace and also in Wide Bargate on Wednesday, marketplace and Straight Bargate of the retail hub of the town centre. Coincidentally, number 1 marketplace and number 1 Straight Bargate of the same building, the 7-storied Maud Foster Tower windmill, completed in 1819, by millwrights Norman and Amp Smithson of Kingston upon Hull for Isaac and Thomas Reckitt, is currently the tallest operating windmill in England, following extensive restoration during the 1980s and early 1990s, and is now a working museum. The tall mill, without the usual tar coating in links, stands on the dike above the drain it is named after and is unusual in having an odd number of sails. The Boston Guildhall, in which the Pilgrim Fathers were tried, on the first floor, by the magistrates, was converted into a museum in 1929. The American Room was opened by the U.S. Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, Sr., in 1938. The cells in which the Pilgrims are said to have been held at the time of the trial are on the ground floor. In 2005 it was closed for repair and refurbishment. The Pilgrim Fathers Memorial is located on the north bank of the Haven a few miles outside the town. It was here at Scotia Creek that the Pilgrims made the first attempt to leave for the Dutch Republic in 1607. The ruined Hussey Tower is all that remains of a medieval brick, fortified house. 2 miles east of Rochford Tower is another medieval tower house. In Skirbick Quarter, on the right bank of the Haven, is the Black Sluice, the outfall of the south 40-foot drain. The Prime Meridian passes through the eastern side of Boston, marked by the fairly modern, suburban Meridian Road, which straddles the line the road was named after. The oldest landmark is the Boston Mayfair, which has been held in the town every year since at least 1125. This fair is held during the first week of May, and is one of the largest outdoor fairs in the country. By tradition, the fair was officially opened by the incumbent mayor at 11 a.m. on the May Day bank holiday. However, this is now not the case. The Haven Gallery, opened in 2005, was closed to the public in 2010 in a cost-cutting measure by Boston Borough Council. Frampton Marsh and Freeston Shore are 2 nature reserves, managed by the RSPB, which lie on the Wash Coast on either side of the mouth of the Haven. In popular culture, the novel The Last Dickens is set in Boston. Boston is often assumed to be the prototype for Flaxborough in the detective novels of Colin Watson. Boston was the birthplace of the 19th-century author and poet Jean Ingelow. Boston was also the Dutch town in One of Our Aircraft is Missing, with scenes showing the stump, externally and internally, and also the dock swing bridge on the River Haven. Boston is mentioned several times in the English band To Kill a King's EP My Crooked Saint. Boston may have been used in Anthony Horowitz's book Oblivion, in which he describes the village with the Church of St. Botolph's. Local economy. Boston's most important industries are food production, including vegetables and potatoes, road haulage and logistics companies that carry the food, the Port of Boston, which handles more than 1 million tons of cargo per year, including the import of steel and timber and the export of grain and recyclable materials, and also shell fishing, other light industry and tourism. The port is connected by rail, with steel imports going by rail each day to Washwood Heath in Birmingham, and the port and town are also connected by trunk roads including the A16 and the A52. Boston has 2 weekly newspapers, the Boston Standard and the Boston Target, and a community radio station called Endeavor Radio. Boston's market is held every Wednesday and Saturday in one of England's largest marketplaces, with an additional market and outside auction held on Wednesdays on Bargate Green. Boston has a theatre and arts centre called Blackfriars, which is housed in the oldest building in Boston Town Centre, which was formerly the refectory of the Benedictine Friary, built in the 13th century and once visited by King Edward I. Work was due to commence in 2014 on a new marina of the River Witham, which would offer moorings, a restaurant and other facilities. The town is also set to be a major part of the Fens Waterway project, which will be an equivalent of the Norfolk Broads. This is scheduled to be completed in 2018. In late 2013, a £100 million development was announced for the outskirts of town on the A16 towards Skirtin. This development, named the Quadrant, is split in 2 phases. Phase 1 consists of a new football ground for Boston United FC, 500 new homes, retail and business outlets and a possible supermarket. This development also includes the beginning of a relief road and would eventually link the A52 Grantham Road and the A16 together. Phase 2, still in the development stage, consists of a possible second new marina, more new homes and retail units. Sport. The Princess Royal Arena is located on the board sides just outside Boston. The stadium is unique owing to the attention given to the disabled. Rugby. Boston Rugby Club is based at the Princess Royal Arena. The club was established in 1927 by Ernst Clark, who had an interest in providing activity for boys. Football. The town has 2 non-league football clubs. The more senior Boston United, nicknamed the Pilgrims, plays in the Conference North. The stadium is currently located on York Street in the center of the town and has an approximate capacity of 6,200. The town's second club, Boston Town, nicknamed the Poachers, plays in the United Counties Football League. Its home games are played at the stadium on Tattersall Road, on the outskirts of Boston. The 2 teams traditionally play each other at the beginning of each season. Rowing. Boston Rowing Club, near Carlton Road, hosts the annual 33 miles Boston Rowing Marathon each year in mid-September. Rowers from throughout the UK compete, starting at Brayford Pool in Lincoln, and finishing in times from 3 to 6 hours. Speedway racing was staged at a stadium in New Hammond Beck Road in the 1970s and 1980s. The Boston Barracudas raced in the British League Division 2, and in 1973 won the League and the Knockout Cup, with one member winning the League Individual Championship. After the New Hammond Beck Road Stadium was sold for redevelopment in 1988, there were failed attempts to secure a new venue in the 1990s. A team, known as Boston, raced in the Conference League at Kings Lynn. Swimming Boston Amateur Swimming Club holds galas and open meets, including the Boston Open, and 2 yearly club championship events. It trains at the Jeff Mulder Swimming Pool. Sailing Whittam Sailing Club is based on the banks of the Whittam, with its own clubhouse. Hell, in the mid-2000s Boston was shown to have the highest obesity rate of any town in the United Kingdom, with 1/3 of its adults considered clinically obese. Obesity has been linked to social deprivation.